Most of us picture the exact same thing when we hear Silk Road. A lone caravan, weighed down with exotic spices, trekking across an endless desert from the emperor's court in ancient China straight to the marble steps of Rome. That linear, continuous highway never existed. The term itself was coined in 1877 by a German geographer, and while it's a deeply evocative metaphor, it flattens the complex reality of ancient global trade. This map shows the reality. The Silk Road was an intricate, ever-shifting web of terrestrial dirt paths, oasis way stations, mountain passes, and absolutely vital maritime corridors. Because this architecture was decentralized, a bolt of silk or a sack of peppercorns changed hands dozens of times. The cargo itself traveled staggering intercontinental distances, but the merchants transporting them usually stayed within their own local, regional circuits. This chain of short-haul relays transformed a series of local paths into an intercontinental trade system that linked the world's major empires long before globalization had a name. The overland routes anchored in massive hubs like the Chinese capital of Chang'an. These heavily populated, commercialized cities possessed the raw manpower and infrastructure needed to supply an entire continent. They exported a highly diverse range of cargo. Merchants packed tea, porcelain, jade, and manufactured goods for the long relay west. But when Chinese silk specifically reached the Roman Empire, it caused an immediate sensation. The wealthy elite demanded the fabric so aggressively that merchants would regularly unravel the tight Chinese weave and reweave it into sheer, transparent garments to maximize their profit margins. This insatiable demand created a severe, highly visible trade imbalance. Roman politicians went on record decrying the massive outflow of their gold and silver to purchase these luxuries, going so far as to attempt banning men from wearing silk altogether. The legislation failed, proving that imperial decrees could not stop an integrated market. This chart illustrates the bidirectional trade. The upper bands show manufactured luxuries and agricultural goods moving outward from the east. In return, the lower section tracks the raw wealth moving back. Gold, silver, and horses poured into Chinese markets. Empires that were separated by thousands of miles and rarely interacted face-to-face were entirely tethered together by this continuous two-way transfer of wealth. To facilitate this transfer, goods crossed the harsh interior of Asia. Brutal desert heat and treacherous mountain ranges funneled trade into specific geographic corridors. Within these corridors, settlements like the Turfan Oasis developed highly sophisticated local economies. Archaeological records show these communities used written commercial contracts, relied on professional moneylenders charging strict monthly interest, and actively traded using fluctuating foreign currencies like Persian silver. The logistical engine keeping all of this moving was a Central Asian civilization known to history as the Sogdians. Reaching their economic peak between the 6th and 8th centuries, they practically built and managed the daily mechanics of the ancient network. They were master diplomats and interpreters who established a massive diaspora of commercial outposts, stretching from the Byzantine borders into the Chinese capital. They lived in deeply cosmopolitan communities, blending Eastern and Western aesthetics in their art, and pulling from Iranian, Mesopotamian, and Indian traditions to name their children. These decentralized middlemen served as the primary vehicle for cultural exchange. Their unmatched commercial dynamism internationalized ancient Asia, spreading major world religions and revolutionary technologies right alongside their physical cargo. A sprawling network of this scale required physical security, which meant it relied entirely on the military force of centralized empires. In the 13th and 14th centuries, the brutal conquests of the Mongol Empire unified a massive swath of Eurasia. This consolidation drastically lowered the enforcement costs of travel, sparking a highly profitable silver century of secure trade. It was during this specific window of deep political stability that European explorers like Marco Polo could safely traverse the continent, returning home to extensively document the vast wealth of the Asian markets. But that hyper-efficient connectivity carried a severe biological cost. The same infrastructure optimized for moving silk and silver also functioned as a highly efficient biological superhighway. As merchant caravans moved across the continent, their textiles and animal hides carried infected fleas. The bacteria Yersinia pestis traveled quietly within these bales. Modern genetic sequencing traces the origins of the Black Death deep into East Asia, decades before it ravaged Europe. The pathogen strictly followed the established trade lines, cascading through Western hubs until it reached the port city of Kaffa, where fleeing merchants carried it directly into the maritime network. The exact commercial infrastructure that generated immense international wealth also perfectly distributed the deadliest pandemic in documented human history. The decline of these overland routes was a slow, painful fracturing. When the Mongol Empire split into rival, competing territories in the 14th century, state-sponsored security collapsed. Merchants were left vulnerable to civil wars, rampant banditry, and exorbitant local tolls. Then, the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire in 1453 placed vital geographic bottlenecks under new control, severing European access to the Asian interior. Faced with dangerous and overtaxed manned routes, Europe aggressively funded advanced transoceanic navigation. Explorers realized they could bypass the terrestrial middlemen entirely by sailing around the southern tip of Africa to reach the Indian Ocean directly. Ships allowed for vastly larger cargo capacities and avoided terrestrial political instability. As oceanic routes achieved total dominance, the great overland oasis cities that had thrived on the caravan trade for millennia slowly emptied out. The physical tracks eventually faded under the desert sand, but the logic of global reliance they established persisted. Economic historians track the global economic center of gravity. After centuries resting in the West due to maritime trade and the Industrial Revolution, the massive contemporary economic rise of East Asia is effectively pulling that center of gravity right back to its ancient origin point. We can see this happening literally. China's multi-trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative is actively funding thousands of miles of new railways, highways, and deep-water ports. It's a deliberate attempt to resurrect the exact geography and connectivity of the ancient system. Only now, instead of camel caravans moving silk and jade, these routes facilitate the massive flow of digital information, financial services, and high-capacity container shipping. Ultimately, the Silk Road proved the movement of goods, ideas, and pathogens follows a systemic logic, one that continues to link our economies today.